Now, I did point out that the 1989 report from the UN was, apocalyptic, even more than today. And all I'm really asking, Laurie, is, shouldn't we use the right language around this subject?
Yeah, so the first thing I want to say is that what an individual UN employee says or said back then, or what the heir to the throne says, is different from what's called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, snappily named, says about the science. And that's the body that released the report today. Now, this body, the IPCC, is kind of like the referee in the sort of to and fro of various narratives on the climate crisis, right? And it's an extraordinarily well focused and educated referee. And this is the 6th report that has come out, which has tried to give us the status of the science since I was born at the end of the 80s. And it's that we should look at when we're trying to understand the severity of the climate crisis, because that's the sort of gold plate in describing what's going on. Now, I agree with your point about language, right? Fair
enough. But to be fair, the comment in 1989 was from the head of the New York office. It wasn't just some, back office employee.
Yeah, sure. And we should talk to Noel Brown or whatever his name was and say, do you think that was the right language to use at the time? I'm pretty sure that person would say, well, I do think it is, because you may have seen the report today. I had a quick look at it earlier. It is dense, it is scientific, and therefore it's quite difficult for people in politics to really get a head around and to tell stories about, which is how we perceive politics. And I can understand that people in the past and now have used language that is in some ways alarming. Now, I think there's a difference between language that is unnecessarily scary or disproportionate, and then language that sort of sounds an alarm. And a lot of the language that we're seeing used at the moment, you could see, for example, the language used by Patrick Vallance, the chief scientific advisor today, and I think in a Guardian article, it is becoming more proportionate because the problem is getting worse and will get worse unless sufficient action is taken.
So how long will the North Pole last, in your opinion?
In my opinion, my opinion isn't that relevant there, because it
is.
The answer to that question
you are
is
a climate change researcher. You've written the book Planet on Fire. I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong, by the way. I'm not saying there's not a link between man's activity and what is going on in the climate. That may well be true. But is it right to terrify everybody? And more than that, what can we do about it? I mean, if we in this country, go on pursuing very expensive electricity, which we've been doing for years, all we're really doing is transferring our manufacturing from this country to India and China. Doesn't really help very much, does it?
Well, OK, let's deal with those two things. The first one, on the Arctic, we know, and we've seen it, it's happened already, that the temperature rises in the Arctic are far more than the rest of the world. We're seeing winters now, or summers in the Arctic region now, where temperatures are higher than we would have here in the summer, where the place is on fire. And that's extraordinary and very worrying, not just for how those areas, the animals and the cities in those regions that are getting very badly damaged. It's also bad for the rest of the planet. There's less ice, means less white stuff to reflect light. So that's very concerning. Now, I haven't looked at the latest papers to have an idea of exactly when there won't be any sea ice in the Arctic, but it's going to happen in my lifetime, most likely.
But the Maldives are still there, aren't they? I mean, we were told in 1989 the Maldives could be gone within a few years. They're still there.
But there are lots of different. Think of it like this: there's a whole cloud of scientific papers that get released every single year that think about what could happen in the future and try to make predictions. And every 5 or 6 years, this IPCC body sort of takes the cloud and works out the core bit of it, the most useful bit in the middle, right? And the sea level rise that we are seeing will mean at some point the Maldives is inundated. It was imprudent for people to put an exact date on that, right? But it is going to be happening in the future if we don't reduce carbon.
Yeah, I mean, that's all well and good, but we keep being told it. And on the point about our behaviour, Boris Johnson made a joke the other day about Mrs. Thatcher closing all the coal pits and being, a great forerunner in the battle against CO2 emissions and climate change. But I had a look at the figures today, and coal consumption is higher today than it was 10 years ago. So I repeat the point. Whatever we do here, if you're right with your views, it's China that needs to change far more than us, isn't it?
China has got a huge job on its hands to reduce emissions, right? Now, think of the atmosphere like a bathtub. When you fill it up to a certain level, it's going to cause serious damage. And every country has a tap that's pouring water into that bathtub to stop the problem, to minimize the risk. And it's not just the Maldives getting inundated. It's places not being able to grow crops. I mean, you talk to people in Greece right now, are they going to be able to meet their food consumption if the whole place is on fire, which we know is the likelihood is increasing as a result of the temperature rise. Now, China has a huge job to do in closing its tap off, but ultimately every country needs to also close its tap. So sure, China needs to do a lot. We also need to do a lot to reduce ours as well. Now,
but we're tiny, aren't we? Come on. We are 1% of the world's emissions, and yet, those fires in Greece are all too real. The fires in California, you're absolutely right, they're all too real. And yet Allegra Stratton, who's the Prime Minister's climate spokesperson, said last week that all this rain in August was because of climate change. I mean, it's quite... What I'm saying to you is we don't get a coherent message, do we, on any of this?
Well, no, we do. The climate is the thing that determines the weather, which is what we see day to day, right? And the rising temperature means that, imagine a dice that you roll every day and it determines the weather, right? The dice is being loaded towards more extreme fires in, say, Greece, or wetter weather like we're experiencing here in the UK, which could be damaging crops.
So any weather event is because of rising CO2 output, yeah?
No, it's weather events could be becoming more severe and frequent. Or we know they are becoming more extreme.
Well,
the more extreme stuff is becoming more frequent.
Well, there are some parts of this report that are actually scientifically written rather well. I mean, for example, page 2000, and I'm not joking, page 2849 does say that there is low confidence that human influence is directly leading to drought. So there's all sorts in these 4,000 pages. But overall, as a parting message, Laurie, I understand you are concerned about the future of our planet, and I don't knock you for that at all. I do criticise the movement for being alarmist and, frankly, for scaring our kids. But what's the one thing that Boris Johnson could do, in your opinion, to make a real difference?
He could provide much more money to be invested in the technologies that will make a difference, because that is the biggest economic opportunity for any country in this century. And Britain is falling behind the pack. If we want to get the benefits of the better jobs, the better technologies, and the better health impacts that will lead to, Britain's got to do more to be leading in that area, like countries like China are. And it's exactly that kind of stuff that will lead us to turn our tap off, as all other countries need to as well.
I'm very sceptical about China in this regard, and they may make commitments, but I'm not sure they'll live up to them. Laurie, thank you for joining us here on GB News.